lawsuits pending in all of these states. Do those states just simply not get to send electoral college representatives? Do we possibly end up with a scenario that nobody has 270 votes? How would all of this sort of work out? So I'm anxious to hear your answer.
Create a lot of opposition among American voters, but it's not beyond the realm of conceivable, theoretical, constitutional possibility. Our next call is from Amber in California.
I was just calling to say thank you for your voice. I really love listening to your show. And also, you were commenting about how Vice President Biden is more of a centrist, and you hope that the Senate is controlled by more centrist Democrats. And Biden did say that he won the nomination based on the fact that he was more center than the rest of the Democrats running, and yet he picked Kamala Harris as his running mate. I just don't understand that. She is not a centrist. She is more towards the left. She wasn't even a good candidate, and that's not really important anymore since he did win the nomination and he will most likely be the next president. But I feel like in some ways there's some contradictions, or it doesn't really make sense how you can say Biden is this way, but he chose the complete opposite as his vice presidential pick. So I don't know that he's going to pick that way when it comes to his cabinet and the things he's going to appoint in his time as president.
That's a very, very good point. Very often, presidential candidates pick people who represent a different wing of the party from themselves. John Kennedy picked Lyndon Johnson, who he didn't like. He didn't expect that Lyndon Johnson would ever become president, but of course, we know what happened. I think when Joe Biden made his decision who he was going to pick for vice president, he had two considerations in mind. Number one, and probably the most important, who will help him win the presidency? But clearly, the second consideration was who might replace me. He's, after all, the oldest person ever to be sworn in as president of the United States. The statistics indicate that there is at least some chance he may not survive 4 years as president. I sure hope he does, because 4 years from now he'll be exactly my age. And I hope the demographics go beyond 82, which is what he'll be. But clearly she has a good chance of becoming president, if not during Biden's term. If Biden decides not to run for re-election, she would have the inside track, vice presidents often do, for getting the nomination for president. Where I think I don't agree with you is her political stand. I think she's somewhat further left ideologically than Biden. I think that may be partly a generational issue. Younger people within the Democratic Party are somewhat more to the left, but she's not a hard leftist. She is not what you would, she doesn't fit into the camp of the progressives who deny free speech, deny due process, think they know it all. She was, after all, a prosecutor. And in fact, some of the criticism that she got was that she was too tough, and that sometimes she wasn't sensitive enough to the concerns of the African-American community, though she is part of that community. So he made his choice. I think his cabinet will consist of people representing all wings of the party. He may very well consider Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren as part of his cabinet. But remember, he's the president. Cabinets are way overrated in their influence and power, particularly cabinet members like, Secretary of Labor and Secretary of the Interior. The key cabinet positions are always going to be Treasury and State and Homeland Security and issues of that kind, commerce perhaps. But we have to wait and see. I suspect that we'll see a center-left presidency, much like Obama's presidency, not as anti-Israel as Obama's presidency turned out to be in the end, but that's what the people voted for. 5 million more people voted for the Biden-Harris ticket than for the Trump-Pence ticket. That's the way democracy works. The Electoral College, he seems to have about 300 electoral votes, many of them contested and challenged. But as you say, he will probably be the next president of the United States. And I think he'll govern from the center left. Our next call is also from California. Jonathan.
How will a potential Joe Biden-Kamala Harris president and VP impact the Taylor Force Act and the current status quo in the Middle East?
Great, thank you for the question. The Taylor Force Act, of course, is named after a great American soldier and hero who was walking in Tel Aviv, in a place where I walk all the time with my family, and a Palestinian terrorist murdered him in cold blood just because he was in Israel. And the United States Congress passed a law limiting, conditioning any kind of support for the Palestinians on them rescinding their pay-to-slay policy. The person who murdered a great American soldier was paid by the Palestinian Authority. His family was paid. And it incentivizes killing, and it rewards killing. And I would think that a President Biden would not change that. He might want to engage more with the Palestinians. He may want to open up the Palestinian consulate or whatever it's called, delegation in Washington. I have no problem with that. He may want to return some economic aid to the Palestinians. And maybe he can persuade them to sit down finally and negotiate with Israel. Remember, Israel has offered to negotiate with the Palestinians over the Trump plan, over other plans. They offered it in 2000, 2001. They offered it in 2008. They've offered it ever since. And the Palestinians don't know how to take yes for an answer and never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. I would hope that a President Biden would continue to put pressure on the Palestinians, not on the Israelis. The Israelis don't need pressure. They want peace. They want a negotiated solution. The majority of Israelis favor a two-state solution as long as the Palestinian state doesn't pose a security threat to Israel and is disarmed and allows for Israeli military presence in the Jordan Valley. Those are all reasonable conditions. You could have a contiguous, viable Palestinian state. If anybody doesn't think a Palestinian state is viable, just visit Ramallah. It's a beautiful city. It looks like downtown Jerusalem, has wonderful stores. People are driving nice cars and electronic shops, and you don't ever see an Israeli soldier or policeman. It is a Palestinian mini-state already. They vote for their own city officials. It's a model of what a Palestinian state could look like if only the Palestinians would accept compromise. Just this week, the Palestinians lost their chief negotiator, Saeb Erekat, who I knew and had dinner with and met on numerous occasions, and he was somebody who was very, very tough negotiator. But in the end, I think he understood that a negotiated peace is what will get the Palestinians to a state, not the BDS movement, not UN resolutions, not protests on college campuses, but sitting down and negotiating. And it's President Trump did a lot to move it in that direction by telling the Palestinians essentially, you're not the only game in town.